What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to my subscribers. If you're new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about how we can really maximize these food plots if we are not getting that rain that we were thinking we were going to get this year. So there's a few ways we can do that. And first off, I want to talk about one thing that is something that a lot of guys talk about is like, well, why don't we just water them, right? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. Now, if you can actually irrigate your food plots, and if you're going to need the exact perfect situation to do that, I think like my grandparents had fruit trees a couple hundred yards in their backyard. My grandpa had a construction company, so he ran a water line out there, put hydrants in, and then he could water his fruit trees. He wasn't doing that for the wildlife, he's just doing that to have fruit. But that was a situation where he was able to get water consistently to an area that was far away out onto the property. So some of you may have that perfect situation. You may want to put water lines in, put those hydrants in, put, sprinklers out on your food plots if you really want to get that extra water out there. Now, the other thing is you can take tanks of water out to your food plots. But let's just run the numbers by here one time real quick. So in order to get an acre of beans to maturity, they need about 20 to 26 inches of water. Now let's just keep in mind that usually when we're food plotting, we're not always trying to get these crops to maturity because we're not harvesting them. So we don't need quite that much water, but let's just run with these numbers quick. So 1 inch of rain on an acre of land is equal to over 27,000 gallons of water. So if we want to get those beans to maturity, we're going to need between 543,000 and 706,000 gallons of water to get an acre of beans to maturity. Those are some really big numbers, so let's put them into perspective just a little bit more. That is the same as 60 to 78 semi-tankers full of water to get an acre of beans to maturity. That is an absolute ton of water, and there is no way that you are going to be able to load up your ATV and carry that much water out onto your food plots. Now, I'm a firm believer that every little bit helps, so if you guys feel like you really want to do that, by all means, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. I'm just telling you that this is really a fool's errand if you think you're going to fully water food plots this way. So what we really want to do is this next list of things. That's how we're really going to maximize our water in these food plots. So it starts out with food plot location selection. And so what we can do when we're doing this, I've talked about this in other videos about using topography when you're selecting your food plot locations. Well, this also helps with getting water on it and keeping water on them. And so how we do that is I have a food plot, for example, that I call my crater food plot. It's like a meteor crater where it's a big crescent of earth and it's open on the back end. And so what happens there is every time it rains, it washes the good soil down into the food plot, but it also brings that moisture and that water down into the food plot, and that's where it stays. So if you have the opportunity to plant a food plot in something like a crater or something like on a bench where it's going to have water coming off of one side and then sit on that level area for a little bit, these are all things that when you're planning out your food plot locations can really help in these drought situations. Well, okay, most of us probably have our food plots in already, and so that's not going to help us. What else can we do? Well, we are at the time of year right now in mid-June where you can still get in a summer cover crop of buckwheat, and what that summer cover crop is going to do is help maintain any moisture in your soil by shading out that soil from other weeds that would grow up, but also from that sun beating down and drying out that soil. And then of course, when we plant into that buckwheat and terminate it, it's going to put that thatch down on top of that seed that you planted, and that's going to again prevent that soil from drying out. So this is why we would like put straw down on grass seed when we plant it, to prevent erosion, but also to minimize the amount of water we need to water grass, because we typically are putting a sprinkler on grass seed. But in this situation, you're just saving as much rainwater as you're actually getting with that thatch and preventing it from being dried out too quickly. Now, maybe you don't put a summer cover crop in. You can still get out there. You can throw down a straw mat. You can throw out straw just like you would if you were planting grass seed to get that thatch on there. That stuff will decay and become part of the nutrients in the soil as well, so it's good to do that as well. If throwing straw out for you isn't too much work, depending on how many acres of food plots we're talking about here. And so that's just a great way to make sure that you are holding what moisture you get in that soil. And then lastly with thatch, if you just have existing thatch down there, from like whatever you planted last year. Maybe you had some cereal grain come up or whatever. That's great too. When you throw those seeds out, they'll hopefully fall in between that thatch, and then that extra thatch too is just keeping more moisture in your soil. You don't really want exposed dirt that's going to just dry out as soon as the sun beats on it. You want to hold what little moisture you get in there as long as possible. So next I want to talk about what seeds we're going to plant, because if we're already looking ahead and seeing that, hey, maybe we're going to have a drought this fall. I did just look at the NOAA website, and as far as the like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan area, they are expecting for the next however long they look out to have normal rainfall this year, whatever that means. But we are going to want to pick our seeds based on how much rain we're going to get. And we can, of course, look at the NOAA website. We can also look at averages for our area. And so some seeds take more water to germinate and come to maturity than other ones do. And so I put together a graph for you guys so I can show you this. So the bigger seeds like peas, beans, and corn take anywhere from 20 to 30 inches of rain in order to get them to maturity. And again, just keep in mind here that we're not always trying to get these things to maturity when we're planting food plots. We're trying to get them to a desirable age during the hunting season. So these rainfall totals will actually be a lot less for us because we're not farming here, we're food plotting. But I'm using these maturity levels because it was the easiest thing to keep consistent with these numbers. And so those big seeds end up needing the most water to germinate and become mature. Now, secondly, we're going to talk about cereal grains. Those cereal grains take anywhere from 12 to 18 inches of rain to germinate and then grow to maturity. But out of all of those, winter rye is the one that is actually the best to plant if you're not expecting water, because it doesn't need as much as the other ones. It actually needs about 20 to 30% less water than oats do. And so this makes it an excellent seed choice if you already had a failed food plot due to drought or whatever else, and you're running out of time before winter. So it's just an awesome seed that'll come up quick. It germinates in about a week. It'll pop up just about anywhere. And so that winter rye ends up being just an amazing seed to throw down if whatever else you planted in your food plots failed because of drought or whatever other reason. But there is one more seed that takes even less water than that. And that is brassicas, which take somewhere between 7 and 11 inches of rain in order to reach maturity. So really, when you look at the size of the seed, that is going to tell you how much water it needs to reach maturity. And so the smaller the seed, the less water you need. So if you're worried about being in a drought condition year after year after year, stick with planting something that is one of those smaller seeds, those brassicas, those cereal grains. Stay away from those bigger seeds like the corn, the beans, the peas. Those are things that are going to take so much more water to grow for you. And so the next thing we want to look at is plant time. So obviously, we want to plant when we have the best chance of rain in front of us, but we're also trying to hit a certain time of year so that those crops are at their most desirability level for the deer herd. So we are typically planting here in southeastern Wisconsin somewhere in around the middle of August. Now, northwestern Wisconsin, I typically plant up there about the beginning of August. And so you can kind of adjust that line on down south. The further south you are, the later you can plant and so on, because you guys have such a longer growing season down there. But what we really want to look at is what those rainfall averages are for our area when we're doing that. So I popped up the rainfall averages for Madison, Wisconsin. This is an area that's right in the middle of where most of you guys are hunting. And it is the graph that represents much of these areas. Now, if you're in like Buffalo, New York, you guys know you have much different precipitation levels at different months than this. But for most of the Midwest, this is what your graph's going to look like as well. But go check it out for your specific area. And so you can see that the rain really does peak in the summer months. And so if you get those seeds in the ground in August, you should have more than enough inches of rain to get these seeds to the level we need to get them to as food plotters. Again, we don't need to get them to that maturity level, so we don't need that total number of rain I showed you in that first chart, but we are going to get enough to get them where we need them to be. So a lot of times we do, of course, want to plant in front of a rain. That's the best way to make sure our seeds aren't disappearing to rodents and turkeys and whatever else out there. But we do need to get them in sooner than later. You don't want to miss a surprise pop-up shower because that is getting put into these averages here. So just sometimes it is better to get the seed down sooner than later. Get that thatch on top of it. That will also help protect it from the birds and the rodents and whatever else might be eating on that seed. And the other thing we have to remember too is that every morning, because it gets cold at night and then warm during the day, there will a lot of times be dew on the ground in the morning, and that moisture can really get held by that thatch that's down there as well. And so that doesn't get counted in these rainfall totals, but it does add that moisture to that ground. And so it's just, as a summer day heats up, it can really hold a lot more moisture, and as it gets colder, it squeezes that moisture out. That's why we have dew on the ground in the morning. And so it's just a way to get a little bit of extra moisture in there, just kind of maintain your moisture levels. But for the most part, you are going to need rain. You can't survive solely on dew. But one last thing I do want to talk about is something that you can actually do that's detrimental in this situation, and that is to disc and to till and to plow. So if you really break up your soil, like inches and inches of your soil, there's other issues you're going to run into with like bringing up noxious weed seeds and getting them to germinate and then having to deal with them. But you're also destroying all of the moisture that was already established in that soil because you're flipping it over. So you're allowing that top layer to dry out, and then you flip it over again and you're allowing that top layer to dry out. And so you aren't going to have any residual moisture in the ground that may have been there since even when the snow melted in the spring. So you're really going to need even more water to replenish that which you took out when you turned over all of that soil. So I love to do no-till, but I also do something that's not quite no-till, and I use a cultivator. So I have a cultivator for the back of the four-wheeler. It is awesome to just bust up that very top layer, maybe like a ½ inch of soil. I would not do this in areas that you guys have bad soil, but in areas that you do have a little bit better soil and you can break up that top ½ inch or whatever, it's a great way to just get a little bit better seed to soil contact without busting up those lower layers of soil where all that moisture is being held. And so if you guys want to check that out, I'll link that down in the description, down in the comments, so you guys can go check that out. But that's just a great way that makes sure that you're getting good seed to soil contact, because that seed to soil contact is also going to be moisture contact. So the soil will hold the moisture next to the seed. Now, if the seed's just sitting balanced on top of the soil, it's a lot harder for that moisture to like embody it and get it to germinate. So you definitely want that seed to soil contact. Use stuff like the thatch I've been talking about. Use something like a cultivator, just agitate that very top layer. Otherwise, you can use something like a cultipacker or a lawn roller to like really mash that seed into the soil. And that's something that's really going to help you guys make sure that these plots are turning into something great. All right, guys, I hope you got some value out of this video. If you really enjoyed this one, you really want to maximize your plots, go check out this video too. This will help you with everything else related to food plotting to make sure you're really maximizing these plots. And if you guys are also in an area that's dealing with poor soil qualities, I really highly recommend this video as well. Go check that one out. That one will help you guys a lot, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.